You know that one summer trip that was supposed to be fun, relaxing, and unforgettable? Well, mine was unforgettable too, but for all the wrong reasons. Before we dive into tonight's terrifying true story, let me ask you something. Backhand index pointing right, have you ever gone on a summer vacation that started off perfectly normal, but ended in a way you'll never forget? Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a creepy or unexplainable experience while traveling. I read every single one. And if you love scary true stories that keep you up at night, make sure you subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a new upload. Now, let's begin. This is Scary True Horror Stories, Summer Vacation. And to this day, I wish I could erase everything I saw, everything I heard, and everything I survived during that summer vacation. It was the summer of 2016, right after freshman year of college. I was 19, and like a lot of kids my age, I thought I was untouchable. My friends and I had been planning this trip for months. It was supposed to be the kind of summer adventure that bonded us forever. There were 5 of us. Me, Tyler, the one telling this story. My girlfriend, Sarah, who never went anywhere without her camera and always had a sharp, curious eye for details. Mark, my best friend's cousin, quiet and responsible, the kind of guy who always kept us out of trouble. Emily, Sarah's roommate, sweet and nervous, but with a smile that could calm a storm. And finally, Jason, the loudmouth of the group, cocky, always cracking jokes, the type to laugh in the face of danger even when everyone else was terrified. We stuffed everything into Jason's old SUV, coolers, fishing gear, clothes, enough snacks to feed an army. The drive from Chicago to northern Wisconsin was supposed to take 6 hours, but with Jason's constant stops and detours, it stretched into 8. The first half of the ride was filled with laughter and music blasting from the stereo. But the further north we drove, the quieter things got. The towns grew smaller, the gas stations more abandoned-looking. The forests on either side of the 2-lane highway grew taller, denser, until it felt like we were driving through a tunnel of trees. The shadows stretched across the cracked asphalt like reaching fingers. I stared out the window and noticed something strange. The trees felt like they were leaning in closer, almost listening. And the weirdest part? We hadn't passed another car in over an hour. We finally stopped at a small rural gas station, the last one before the turnoff to the cabin. The place looked like something from a horror movie, peeling paint on the sign, a single flickering light above the door, an old vending machine that probably hadn't worked since the 90s. Inside, the air smelled like motor oil and stale coffee. Behind the counter stood an older man in his 60s, his weathered face creased deep with lines. He didn't even greet us, just watched with sunken eyes as we grabbed snacks and drinks. Sarah, trying to be polite, asked if he knew the cabin we were headed to, the one on Pine Lake. The man froze mid-movement. He slowly turned his head toward us. "That place still renting out?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yeah," Jason said with a nervous chuckle. "Why? Something wrong with it?" The man leaned forward, lowering his voice like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "Stay inside at night. Don't go wandering out there after dark. You hear me?" Mark frowned. "Why? Bears?" The man didn't blink. His face didn't soften. He just muttered, "Worse." Then he turned his back and walked away. We all exchanged uneasy glances. Jason, of course, laughed it off. "Come on, he's just trying to freak us out. Small town stuff." But deep down, I could tell none of us believed that. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun had completely disappeared behind the trees. The headlights swept over the building, and my heart sank. The pictures online had lied. It wasn't some cozy lakeside getaway. It was older, smaller, the kind of place you'd expect to see condemned. The wooden panels sagged, the paint peeled like rotting skin, and the porch tilted slightly to the left. But worse than the cabin were the woods. They were suffocating, enormous pine trees that blocked out the stars, their branches knotted together so tightly it felt like the forest itself was swallowing us whole. Emily shivered as we carried our bags inside. "This place feels wrong." The interior wasn't much better. Outdated furniture, an air thick with mildew, and a silence so heavy it pressed against our ears. Still, we tried to laugh it off. Jason turned up the music. Sarah unpacked food. Mark lit a fire in the old stone fireplace. But when I finally laid down in bed that night, a thought gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. It began with scratching. At first, I thought it was just a branch brushing against the wall. But then I realized it was coming from the window, deliberate, slow, dragging scratches across the glass. I sat up, my chest tightening. The sound stopped immediately. From the other room, I heard Mark whisper, "Did you hear that?" Emily whimpered. "It sounds like a kid." And then it came, faint laughter. High-pitched. Drifting through the woods outside. Every hair on my body stood on end. Jason tried to brush it off. Probably some kids messing around. But the nearest house was miles away. No kids. No neighbors. Just us. The next morning, Sarah found an old leather journal tucked behind a stack of firewood on a shelf. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed. She flipped through them while we sat at the table. The entries were from 2001. They began normal, a family writing about fishing, hiking, swimming. But the tone shifted, the handwriting grew shaky, frantic. One entry read, "Don't go near the lake after dark. Don't look at the water." Another, "We hear them every night. The children. They want us to come outside. We can't let them in." The final entry was smeared and barely legible, "They're at the windows." Sarah's face went pale. Emily begged her to put it away. Jason laughed nervously, but even he didn't sound convinced. We locked every door. Shut every window. Told ourselves it was just a story. Just an old journal. Nothing to worry about. But sometime after midnight, I woke up shivering. The air was freezing, far colder than it should have been. I sat up and my stomach dropped. Every single window in the cabin was wide open. Curtains billowed inward, moonlight flooding across the floor. And we had locked them. All of them. We stumbled into the living room, panicked, whispering, arguing about what to do. And then, we heard it. The unmistakable sound of bare feet sprinting across the wooden porch. Fast. Heavy. Right outside the door. And then, silence. And that was when I realized, whatever was out there wasn't trying to break in. It was trying to lure us out. When the sun rose the next morning, it was as if the night before had never happened. The windows were shut again. The porch looked untouched. No footprints, no sign of anyone outside. Jason tried to laugh it off. Probably animals. Raccoons, maybe. Y'all freaked out over nothing. But Mark shook his head. Raccoons don't laugh. Raccoons don't run like people. None of us said it out loud, but we all thought the same thing. We weren't imagining this. Sarah suggested we explore during the day, maybe clear our heads. Staying cooped up inside only made the silence heavier. So, after breakfast, we decided to finally check out the lake. The path to the lake was narrow, winding between massive pine trees that blocked most of the sunlight. Birds should have been singing, but the forest was dead quiet. Each step of crunching gravel echoed like it was too loud. And then, after 15 minutes, the trees parted, and there it was. Pine Lake. It was beautiful in a way that was almost unnatural. Perfectly still water reflecting the skylight glass. The treeline bent inward around it, giving the lake the feeling of being completely cut off from the rest of the world. But the beauty was wrong. Too still. Too quiet. Emily wrapped her arms around herself. I don't like this. It feels watched. Sarah lifted her camera and snapped photos, though her hands trembled slightly. Jason tossed a rock into the water. The ripples spread, but when they reached the center, they stopped, like something swallowed them whole. Mark muttered, "That's not normal." That night, I couldn't sleep. The memory of the footsteps on the porch kept replaying in my head. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, until I heard it. A voice. It was faint, coming from outside. At first, I thought it was the wind. But no, it was words. Tyler. I froze. My blood turned cold. It was a child's voice, soft, almost sing-song. Tyler, come outside. I sat up slowly. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. The voice came again, clearer this time, drifting from the direction of the lake. Tyler, we've been waiting. I wanted to wake the others, but when I turned my head, I saw Sarah sitting up too. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. You heard it too, she whispered. Before I could answer, the voice echoed again, this time louder. Come play with us. The next morning, none of us pretended anymore. Something was out there. Something that knew my name. Mark, always the practical one, decided to search the cabin. He went through every drawer, every cabinet, and finally, the attic. When he came back down, his face was pale. In his hands, he held a box filled with old photos. They were Polaroids. Dozens of them. Families standing by the lake. Kids on the porch. Smiling faces. But the later photos looked wrong. The smiles faded. The families looked gaunt, hollow-eyed. The very last Polaroid made my skin crawl. It showed the cabin at night, taken from outside. And through the window, 5 figures stood. Staring out. That night, none of us wanted to sleep. We stayed huddled in the living room, the fire crackling low. Around midnight, the laughter returned. This time, it wasn't faint. It surrounded the cabin, drifting through the trees, circling us. Then the voices began to chant. Soft. Sing-song. Childlike. Come to the water, come to the water. Jason, trying to be brave, grabbed a flashlight. I'm done hiding. Let's see who's screwing with us. He flung the door open before we could stop him. Cold night air rushed inside. And in the distance, through the trees, we saw it, the lake, glowing faintly under the moonlight. And standing at the edge, were silhouettes. Small. Childlike. Motionless. Jason, don't, I hissed. But he stepped onto the porch anyway. The figures turned their heads toward us. And then, they smiled. And when those figures smiled, I knew, whatever they weren't children. And they wanted us to follow. The morning after seeing the silhouettes, we all sat around the table in silence. Nobody touched their food. Nobody even cracked a joke, not even Jason. Sarah finally broke the silence. They weren't kids. You all saw that, right? Emily nodded quickly, eyes wide. They were too still. Too wrong. Mark rubbed his hands over his face. And the way they smiled, that wasn't human. I stared at the table. My name still echoed in my head. The voices calling me specifically. I didn't tell the others, not yet. A part of me was afraid if I said it out loud, it would make it more real. Sarah grabbed the old leather journal again. She flipped past the pages we'd already read and found more entries, ones she hadn't noticed before. The handwriting had deteriorated badly, scrawled and messy. But the words were enough to make my stomach twist. They live in the water. They wait for us at night. We tried leaving, but the car wouldn't start. The roads changed. We couldn't get out. Then, in large, shaky letters across 2 full pages. Don't answer when they call your name. Sarah's voice shook as she read the words out loud. Emily burst into tears. Jason swore under his breath and snatched the book away like he wanted to throw it into the fire. But he didn't. Something about the way the ink was smeared, the desperation in those words, kept us frozen. By midday, we decided enough was enough. We had to leave. Jason and I carried our bags to the SUV. He tossed them in the back and climbed into the driver's seat, turning the key. The engine sputtered. Coughed. Died. He tried again. Nothing. Mark popped the hood, checking the engine. Everything looked fine. The battery was strong. There was no reason the car shouldn't start. But no matter how many times Jason turned the key, it refused to come to life. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The gravel driveway, the one we'd driven up the day before, didn't look the same. It was narrower. The trees seemed closer, thicker, as if they'd shifted overnight, closing us in. It was like the forest itself didn't want us to leave. That night, the voices came again. But this time, it wasn't just a child's voice calling my name. There was another. A woman. Her tone was soft, soothing, almost motherly. "Tyler, they just want to play. Come to the water, it's safe here." Sarah clutched my arm so hard it hurt. She was shaking, her eyes glistening with tears. Emily covered her ears and rocked back and forth. Jason paced in circles, muttering, "It's just in our heads, it's just in our heads." But I knew it wasn't. I could hear every word clearly, as if the voice was whispering right against the glass of the window. And then, all at once, every window in the cabin rattled violently, like hands were pounding against them from the outside. When the pounding stopped, Mark picked up the journal again. His face went pale as he flipped to the very last page. It wasn't writing this time. It was a drawing. A crude sketch of the lake under a full moon. Dark shapes stood at the water's edge, children with hollow faces and stretched smiles. And drawn in the center, standing among them, was a figure labeled in shaky handwriting. The drowned woman. And as I stared at that sketch, I realized with a sickening certainty, we hadn't just stumbled onto a haunted cabin. We were standing in the middle of something much older, and it already knew our names. The cabin smelled like damp wood and stale food. Nobody wanted to eat anymore. Emily sat curled in the corner, knees to her chest, rocking like a frightened child. Jason was pacing in tight circles, muttering under his breath, his eyes darting to the door every few seconds as if it might suddenly explode inward. Sarah hadn't stopped staring at her camera for hours, reviewing footage over and over. She swore she caught glimpses of a figure moving in the treeline. Every time she replayed the video, she claimed the figure was closer. "Stop watching it," Jason snapped, slamming his fist against the wall. "You're making it worse." Sarah lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were bloodshot. "It's not me making it worse. She's already here." The room fell silent. Even Jason didn't respond. And me? I sat at the kitchen table, head in my hands, whispering my own name just to hear it in my own voice, trying to drown out the other version of it I kept hearing in my head. Soft. Feminine. Calling me from the dark. By late afternoon, Sarah wandered outside. I didn't notice until the door creaked shut behind her. Panic shot through me, and I rushed after her with Mark. She was at the lake, standing perfectly still at the shoreline, camera dangling from her hand. The water reflected her image, clear and sharp, but it wasn't the only one. "Sarah!" I shouted. She didn't move. Didn't blink. When I reached her side, she whispered without looking at me, "She's in the water." I followed her gaze. At first, I saw nothing but us reflected in the still, glassy lake. Then, something else shimmered into focus. Behind our reflections stood a tall, drenched woman. Her hair hung in long, wet ropes across her face. Her dress clung to her body, torn and waterlogged. Her lips curved into a grin that was wrong, stretched too far, too sharp. I jerked my head up. Nothing on the water. Nothing on the shore. Just silence. But when I looked back down at the reflection, she was still there. And this time, she raised her hand. And waved. I staggered back, nearly tripping over a rock. Sarah finally blinked and gasped, as if she had been hypnotized. She clutched her camera like a weapon and whispered, "She's waiting for us." That night, none of us slept. Every time the fire crackled, I thought it was footsteps. Every time the wind brushed the cabin walls, I thought it was fingernails. Around 3 a.m., a sound tore through the silence. The front door creaked open. I bolted upright. Emily's bed was empty. Mark grabbed a flashlight, and we ran outside. The air was freezing, and fog clung to the ground in patches that twisted like living shapes. Our breath came out in white bursts as we followed the sound of soft footsteps crunching down the dirt path. "Emily!" I shouted. She didn't respond. She was already halfway to the lake, barefoot, her nightgown trailing in the dirt. Her arms hung limply at her sides. Her eyes were closed. When we caught her, Mark grabbed her shoulders and shook her. "Wake up! Emily, wake up!" Her lips parted, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was calm, soothing, feminine. "She's waiting for us. She wants us home." Mark's face twisted in horror. He slapped her cheek lightly, and Emily's eyes flew open. She gasped for air like she had been drowning, then broke down sobbing. We dragged her back inside and locked every window, every door. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. Locks don't stop something that's already inside your head. An hour later, the knock came. Soft. Gentle. Like a polite visitor. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. Jason froze in place, clutching a fireplace poker like his life depended on it. His voice trembled. "Don't answer it. Don't." Then came the voice. A woman's voice. Sweet. Motherly. Almost kind. "Please. I'm lost. Let me in. I'm so cold." Sarah began to cry, covering her mouth with her hands. Emily curled into Mark's side, whimpering. The voice came again, closer this time. As if the woman's lips were pressed against the wood. "Tyler, open the door. I need you." Every muscle in my body seized. It wasn't just the voice. It was the way it wrapped around my name. Tender. Commanding. I found myself standing before the door without realizing I'd moved, my hand hovering over the knob. Mark grabbed me, yanking me back. "It's not her," he hissed. "It's never her. Don't you dare." The knocking stopped. Silence. Then, slow, wet footsteps sloshing down the path toward the lake. We sat in silence until the first gray light of dawn seeped through the trees. Just as I thought maybe we'd survive the night, Sarah let out a strangled scream. She was pointing at the window. We all turned. Pressed against the glass was a face. Pale. Bloated. Dripping with lake water. Strands of wet hair clung to hollow, lifeless eyes. Her lips were stretched into that same too-wide grin, jagged teeth glistening behind it. The drowned woman. She didn't move. Didn't blink. She just stared. And then, in a voice that rattled inside my skull, she whispered my name. "Tyler." The sound didn't come from her mouth. It came from everywhere. The walls. The floorboards. Inside my own head. And I knew then, she wasn't asking anymore. She was demanding. That was the first time we saw her clearly, the thing that haunted Pine Lake. The drowned woman. But what chilled me more than her face pressed against that window was the way she said my name. As if I already belonged to her. You can only ignore something for so long before the truth forces its way in. And Pine Lake had been holding on to its truth for decades, waiting for someone foolish enough to stir it back up. Morning. It felt wrong, like the woods themselves hadn't slept. We sat in silence at the kitchen table, faces pale and sunken, like we hadn't just woken up but had been drained during the night. Emily clutched her blanket so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her eyes darted to every corner of the room, searching for something none of us could see. Jason, who was usually all jokes and loud energy, sat slouched in his chair with a cigarette trembling between his fingers. The smoke coiled upward, but his hands shook so badly that ash spilled all over the floor. Sarah set down her camera, her lips pressed thin. I could see the question burning in her eyes. Why us? Finally, she broke the silence. We need to know what we're dealing with. If we don't, we're sitting ducks. Her voice carried a strength none of us felt, but the fear beneath it was obvious. Jason muttered, "Know what we're dealing with? We're dealing with crazy ghost crap. What else do you need to know? We pack up, we leave. Done." But even as he said it, he didn't move. We all knew leaving wasn't going to stop this thing. She'd already found us. Mark leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "There's an old ranger's station. 2 miles up the road. If anything happened here, missing campers, accidents, there might be records. Reports." His tone was calm, but his eyes, they weren't calm. They were calculating, like he already knew there would be something waiting for us in those files. I didn't want to admit it, but the thought of not knowing felt worse than anything. So we agreed. The hike to the ranger station was quiet, too quiet. No birds. No wind. Even the crunch of our footsteps felt muffled, like the forest didn't want us there. When we finally saw it, half hidden by overgrowth, the building looked like something the earth had been trying to swallow whole. The roof sagged on one side. The windows were boarded. Moss climbed high up the rotting wood. Jason kicked the door open. The smell hit us first: mold, mildew, the sharp tang of rot. Inside, the station looked like it had been frozen in time and left to rot. Rusted filing cabinets lined the walls, broken chairs lay scattered, and a thick layer of dust coated everything. Sarah's flashlight beam cut across cobwebs and water-stained documents. "There has to be something," she whispered, rifling through the drawers with a frantic urgency. Jason hovered by the door, muttering curses under his breath as if saying them could keep him safe. Emily stood near the wall, refusing to step further in, her blanket still draped over her shoulders like armor. Mark pried open a warped cabinet and pulled out a box, swollen with water damage. He set it on a desk, the wood creaking beneath its weight. "Here," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. We crowded around. The papers inside were brittle, eaten by damp, but the dates were still clear: 1974, 1982, 1995, 2003. Each document carried the same heading: Missing Person, Pine Lake. Over a dozen names. Campers. Hikers. Locals. Families. All vanished. And every single one of them shared the same note in their report: last seen near the water. Near the bottom of the stack, Sarah's hands stilled. She had pulled out a thin, handwritten report. Unlike the others, this wasn't official. It looked personal, scribbled in a ranger's notebook decades ago. She read it aloud, her voice trembling. Local rumor: Eleanor Vale. Bride-to-be. Drowned in Pine Lake, 1943. Fiancé never found her body. Some say she still walks the shore, looking for him. Others say she lures strangers into the water to keep her company. The words seemed to echo in the empty station. Eleanor Vale. Suddenly, she wasn't just a figure at the edge of the lake. She was a person. A woman with a story. A woman who had suffered. Jason gave a bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. Fantastic. So we're being haunted by some ghost bride with abandonment issues. His voice cracked at the end, betraying his fear. I couldn't laugh. Because when Sarah said her name, Eleanor Vale, something stirred inside me. My chest tightened, and my skin prickled with cold. And I remembered the way she had whispered my name. Not Mark's. Not Jason's. Mine. On our way back to the cabin, the forest felt heavier, darker. Every tree seemed to lean inward, as if listening. Halfway down the trail, Emily froze. Do you hear that? We stopped. There was nothing at first. Then, faint, far away, the sound of a woman sobbing. It was low and broken, drifting through the trees like the wind was carrying it straight to us. Sarah gripped my arm. Tell me that's not her. Jason hissed, don't say her name. But the sobbing grew louder. It wasn't just grief. It was rage wrapped in sorrow. And then, silence. The woods fell so quiet it hurt. We didn't run, but we walked fast, too scared to look back. None of us wanted to see what might have been following. That night, back in the cabin, we did what we could to feel safe. We shoved blankets against the windows, nailed boards over cracks, and pushed furniture against the doors. But you can't keep a voice out. It started softly, almost like a lullaby. A woman humming. Slow. Melodic. Sliding through the walls like the wood itself was singing. Emily pressed her hands over her ears and whimpered. Jason cursed under his breath, rocking back and forth. Mark whispered, "Ignore it. Don't acknowledge her." But the humming grew louder. And louder. Until it wasn't humming at all. It was words. "Tyler, come home. Tyler, I'm waiting." The sound came from everywhere at once, inside the walls, above the ceiling, beneath the floor. Sarah gripped her camera with shaking hands. And then it beeped. She hadn't realized it had been recording. On playback, her face went pale. Because the voice we heard with our ears, soft, almost sweet, wasn't what the camera caught. The camera's audio was nothing but a scream. We had a name now. A face. A story. Eleanor Vale, the drowned bride of Pine Lake. But knowing her name didn't make her less dangerous. If anything, it made her closer. Because the way she said mine, over and over, told me one thing for certain. She wasn't going to stop until I joined her in the water. The next morning, the cabin felt wrong. It wasn't just the damp smell of wood and lake water that seemed to cling to everything, or the fact that none of us had really slept. It was the air itself. Thick. Charged. Like the whole room was waiting to breathe. Emily was the first to break the silence. She sat at the table, her blanket gone for once, her face pale and still. Her eyes didn't look tired like ours, they looked empty. Sarah whispered, "Emily? You okay?" She didn't answer. Instead, she started humming. It was soft, low, the same tune we had heard drifting through the cabin walls the night before. Mark nearly dropped the mug in his hand. Jason muttered, "No, no, no. Not this." I forced myself to speak. "Emily, where did you learn that?" Her head turned slowly toward me. Her lips curled into something that wasn't a smile, not really. And when she spoke, her voice wasn't hers. It was hers. Eleanor Vale's. "Tyler." We surrounded Emily, trying to shake her out of it. Sarah slapped her cheek lightly, whispering her name over and over. Jason shouted, pacing like a caged animal. And then, just as suddenly as it started, Emily blinked. Her shoulders slumped. She looked at us all with wide, tear-filled eyes. "What?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why are you looking at me like that?" When Sarah told her what she'd been doing, Emily broke down. She swore she didn't remember humming. She swore she hadn't said my name. But the camera remembered. Sarah had been recording the whole thing, and on playback, Emily's lips didn't move when we heard the voice. They stayed still, frozen in that unnatural almost smile, while the whisper echoed from her chest. "Tyler, come home. We thought maybe leaving the cabin would help. Fresh air. Sunlight. Distance." But Pine Lake's woods had a way of twisting time. No matter which path we took, it always seemed to loop us back toward the water. Jason snapped. He started kicking trees, shouting into the forest. "You want us? Huh? Come out. Stop hiding." The woods answered. Branches creaked like bones. Leaves rustled when there was no wind. And then, clear as day, we all heard it again, the sobbing. Louder this time. Closer. Emily doubled over, clutching her stomach, screaming as though someone was clawing inside her. When she lifted her head, her eyes were wrong. Cloudy. Milky. And through her lips came the voice again. "You're mine, Tyler. Don't run." Back in the cabin, Mark was the only one calm enough to think. He kept digging through the ranger files we'd stolen. "There's a pattern," he muttered, spreading the papers across the floor. "Every missing person, they were part of a group. Families, campers, friends. But only one was ever targeted directly." I frowned. "Targeted?" He nodded grimly. "The reports mention voices. Always calling to one person. Always trying to separate them. The others? They were collateral. She only needed one." His eyes locked on me. "She's not after all of us. She's after you, Tyler." The room spun. My throat went dry. Jason cursed, throwing a chair against the wall. Sarah held her camera tighter, like documenting this nightmare would make it real enough to fight. And Emily. Emily just sat in the corner, humming again, rocking back and forth like a puppet on invisible strings. That night, we tried to sleep in shifts, but it was useless. Every creak, every whisper outside the cabin walls kept us awake. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of water dripping. I sat up and froze. Emily was standing by the door, her hair soaked, her nightgown dripping wet, a puddle forming beneath her bare feet. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. And when she spoke, it wasn't Emily at all. "Come to me, Tyler. The water's waiting." The water swallowed me whole. Cold filled my lungs like fire, burning as I sank deeper and deeper into the black abyss. Pale hands pulled me downward, their nails digging into my skin. My chest convulsed, desperate for air. Eleanor's face hovered above me, blurred and wavering in the murky depths. Her lips moved soundlessly. "Forever." My vision dimmed. My heart slowed. The weight of the lake pressed against me until I felt my body break. But then, something snapped. In that void, a single spark flared, rage. Not against her. Against myself. Against the thought of giving up. Against the curse swallowing my friends, my life. I clawed at the ghostly hands, ripping free. Their flesh dissolved into mist as I thrashed, kicking upward with everything I had left. My lungs screamed, vision tunneling to black. The water thrashed violently, Eleanor shrieking in fury. Her voice rattled inside my skull. "You can't leave me." But I kept swimming. I pushed until the darkness itself seemed to split, until my hand broke the surface. "Air." I burst upward, gasping, coughing out black water that burned like acid in my throat. My body shook violently, but I was alive. I staggered onto the shore, collapsing into the mud. My chest heaved violently, throat raw, every inch of my body trembling. The fog swirled angrily around me. Eleanor's scream echoed across the lake, shaking the trees, splitting the night. I didn't look back. On all fours, I crawled through the muck, my nails digging into the dirt, dragging myself away from that cursed water. Every shadow seemed to lunge, every whisper in the wind clawing at my mind. Somehow, through the blur, I saw it, the outline of the old abandoned caretaker's house, standing crooked at the edge of the woods. Broken windows. A door hanging by one hinge. A shelter. A chance. I threw myself against the door. It groaned loudly, threatening to break, but swung open under my weight. I collapsed inside, slamming it shut behind me, pressing my back to the splintered wood as my chest heaved. The house was silent. Dust floated in the air like smoke. Broken furniture littered the floor. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls in long strips. But it was dry. It was away from the water. For the first time in what felt like hours, I could breathe. My shaking hands gripped my chest, counting every desperate beat of my heart. I was alive. But survival came with a cost. Because the house wasn't empty. In the corner, a cracked mirror leaned against the wall. My reflection stared back at me, pale, soaked, and bloodied. But then, it smiled. I hadn't. The reflection's lips moved silently. And even without sound, I understood the word. Forever. A chill spread through me, colder than the lake had ever been. I stumbled back, eyes wide, my breath catching. Outside, in the distance, the faint sound of children's laughter carried through the fog. And I knew, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Tyler survived that night. But some say he was never the same. He left town soon after, wandering from place to place, never staying near water, never sleeping near mirrors. Locals whisper he still wakes up drenched in lake water, choking on phantom hands. And if you ever pass the lake on a foggy night, you might see him standing at the shore. Watching. Waiting. Because some curses don't end. They follow you. The ground split open with a thunderous crack, spraying mud and lake water into the air like blood from a fresh wound. I fell hard, my chest slamming against the wet earth, knocking the wind out of me. My hands slipped in the muck as I scrambled forward, coughing, heart hammering. Sarah was crawling toward me, her face streaked with dirt, her broken arm dangling uselessly at her side. Her lips trembled, her voice weak, yet desperate. "Tyler, don't stop." Behind us, the battle wasn't over. Mark was locked in a death struggle, Jason's body crushing him into the earth. But Jason wasn't Jason anymore. His eyes were pits of blackness, his mouth stretched too wide in an inhuman snarl. Both hands tightened around Mark's throat, veins bulging as he forced the air from his lungs. Mark's face had turned purple, his legs kicking violently in the mud. His nails dug into Jason's forearms, drawing blood, but Jason didn't even flinch. He was stronger than any man should ever be. "Mark!" I screamed, stumbling toward them. But I couldn't get close. The ghost children had formed a circle around me, their hollow eyes glowing faintly like lanterns. Their pale faces were emotionless, their lips curled into thin smiles. They moved in perfect unison, shuffling closer and closer, their bare feet making wet slaps against the ground. And then she appeared. Eleanor. Her silhouette emerged from the mist as if the fog itself birthed her. The long, dripping gown dragged across the mud, trailing water wherever it touched. Her skin was as pale as bone, veins dark as ink spreading beneath the surface. She walked with slow, deliberate steps, not rushing, because she didn't need to. Her eyes locked onto mine. I froze. Her lips curled into the faintest smile. "It's time." Suddenly, Jason's scream tore through the night, not Eleanor's, not the demon's, but his own voice. For just a moment, he was back. His eyes cleared, filling with agony. "Tyler," he choked, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "She wants you. She won't stop, unless..." But before he could finish, his body convulsed violently. His head snapped back as though strings were pulling him skyward. Eleanor raised one hand lazily, and Jason's body obeyed. His chest twisted unnaturally, bones snapping like twigs under invisible pressure. Mark slipped free, gasping desperately, his throat raw and swollen. He scrambled backward, coughing blood into the dirt. Jason's body jerked one last time before collapsing in the mud, chest caved inward like an empty shell. He didn't move again. I froze. My best friend. Gone. Mark's trembling hand clutched my wrist. "We can't fight her. Tyler, we have to run." But the circle of ghost children tightened, closing every path but one. Behind them, the lake boiled violently, waves crashing though no wind stirred. Eleanor's voice was smooth, almost tender. "You can't run from what you already are." The fog shifted, and suddenly, I wasn't on the shore anymore. I was somewhere else. The air shimmered, pulling me into another time, another place. I stood in a vision of the village that once lay here, long before the flood drowned it. Wooden cottages lined the dirt path, their roofs glowing orange with fire. People screamed and ran as the ground shook. The dam had burst. A wall of black water roared toward them, devouring everything in its path. The sound was deafening, like the earth itself had cracked in half. And then I saw her. Eleanor. But not the ghost. Not the monster. The woman. She stood on the church steps, her white wedding gown torn and bloodied. Her wrists were bound with rope, villagers shoving her forward, spitting accusations. She cursed us, one man shouted. She brought the flood, another screamed. Her husband was there, the man she loved, the one she trusted. But instead of saving her, he pointed at her, sealing her fate. His face twisted with fear, with cowardice. When the water came, no one untied her. No one helped. They left her to drown, screaming, thrashing, choking as the black waves swallowed her whole. Her eyes locked on mine across centuries. In that moment, I understood. They chose me as their sacrifice, she whispered. But now, I choose you. The vision shattered. I was back on the collapsing shore, gasping, drenched in sweat. The lake surged upward as if alive. Water rose in towering shapes, arms, faces, entire bodies sculpted from black liquid. They clawed their way out of the lake, shrieking without mouths, their hollow eyes fixed on us. Sarah screamed as one watery arm shot forward, wrapping around her waist like a serpent. It yanked her off her knees, dragging her toward the lake. I lunged forward, grabbing her free hand. Her nails tore into my skin as I pulled with every ounce of strength I had left. "Don't let go, Tyler," she cried, her voice raw with terror. Mark stumbled to my side, both of us pulling desperately against the impossible force. But Eleanor raised her other hand, and the water obeyed. Sarah's body convulsed. Her scream ripped through the fog as her hand slipped from mine. I'll never forget that look in her eyes, that final plea, that pure terror, before she was ripped beneath the surface. The water closed over her. Gone. N-O-O. My roar shook my throat raw. Mark's face twisted with shock, but we had no time to grieve. Another watery hand lashed out, wrapping around his throat. He was lifted into the air, legs kicking violently. His hands clawed at the grip, gasping desperately. "Run," he croaked, voice strangled. "Tyler, run." With a violent snap, his neck broke. His body went limp, tossed aside like a rag doll. And then there was only me. The ghost children stepped aside, leaving a single path open, straight into the water. Eleanor stood at the edge, her arms outstretched as though waiting for her groom at the altar. Her gown billowed in the fog, her hollow eyes glowing faintly. "You're mine, Tyler. You've always been mine." My legs shook violently beneath me. Rage, grief, terror, it all burned in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to fight, to scream. But something deeper, something older, told me the truth. This wasn't chance. It was fate. The mud cracked beneath me. Water swallowed my boots, then my legs, pulling me down. I thrashed, clawing at the ground, but the children's pale hands clamped onto me, pushing me deeper, dragging me toward her. The water climbed to my chest. My throat. My mouth. Eleanor knelt in front of me, lowering her face to mine. Her cold lips hovered an inch from mine. "Forever," she whispered. The water closed over my head. Darkness. Silence. Nothing. They never found our bodies. The lake is quiet now. Evil doesn't always attack with claws or screams. Sometimes it just whispers until you turn on each other. By the time the sun crawled over the treeline, we weren't just tired, we were unraveling. Jason stomped back and forth across the cabin, muttering curses under his breath, his hands trembling. "She's inside her. You all saw it. Emily's gone. We need to end this before she takes us all." Sarah snapped. "She's not gone, Jason. She's our friend. We're not just going to leave her out there to die." Mark sat quietly at the table, fingers steepled under his chin, his eyes bloodshot. He wasn't saying much, but his silence was worse than Jason's rage. And then there was Emily. She sat in the corner, wrapped in her damp blanket, humming that cursed tune under her breath. Sometimes her lips moved, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes it wasn't even her voice. I tried to keep us together, but every word I spoke felt useless. Eleanor had done what the woods couldn't. She'd planted the seed of doubt inside us. It happened fast. Jason lunged at Emily, yanking her up by the shoulders. You hear me, Eleanor? He screamed in her face. I know you're in there. I'll drag you out myself. Emily wailed, thrashing like a child. But then her cry broke into laughter, low, guttural, wrong. You'll all turn on him. That's how it ends. Jason froze. The voice hadn't come from Emily's lips. It had slithered out of the cabin walls themselves. He dropped her like she was burning him. Sarah rushed to Emily's side, screaming at Jason. Mark finally stood, his chair scraping across the floor, his patience snapped. You're losing it, he growled at Jason. That's exactly what she wants. But Jason's wild eyes turned toward me. No. You don't get it. She's not after Emily. She's after him. He jabbed a finger at me. Tyler. She keeps calling for him. We're just bait. The silence that followed felt worse than the screams. Because deep down, I knew Jason wasn't wrong. Sarah clutched her camera like a lifeline. If we can just capture proof, if we can show the world what's happening, maybe. But her voice broke. There was no conviction in it anymore. Maybe what? Jason spat. Nobody's coming. Nobody cares. This is Pine Lake. People vanish here all the time. Emily began to laugh again, softly, rocking back and forth. Sarah buried her face in her hands. Please, Tyler, tell me what to do. You're the only one holding this together. I wanted to tell her we'd be okay. I wanted to lie. But Eleanor Vale's whispers were already slithering through my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lake. I felt her cold hand reaching for me. That night, Mark finally cracked the code. There's a reason she drowned the children first, he whispered, hunched over the ranger's journal. It wasn't cruelty. It was binding. She marked them, and through them, she cursed the land itself. That's why no one ever leaves Pine Lake. Once you hear her, you're hers. I swallowed hard. So what do we do? Mark's face was pale, hopeless. I don't know. But I think, he hesitated, then looked straight at me. You're the key. She doesn't just want you, Tyler. She needs you. The room seemed to breathe with his words. And from the shadows, Emily whispered. He's already mine. The fighting, the paranoia, the whispers, it all crashed down at once. Jason stormed out into the woods, swearing he'd rather take his chances out there than rot in the cabin with us. Sarah begged him not to go, but he didn't look back. Mark slammed the door shut after him, locking it tight. He's as good as dead, he muttered. And that's when Emily began to scream. Her voice twisted into 2, then 3, then dozens, a chorus of drowned children shrieking through her throat. The cabin shook with the sound. And over it all came Eleanor's voice, clear as day. One by one, until only Tyler remains. The sound didn't just echo through the woods, it ripped through the cabin walls and straight into our bones. Jason's scream was unlike anything I'd heard before. It wasn't human anymore. It rose and fell in unnatural pitches, as if 2 voices were crying out of one throat, one desperate, one mocking. We froze. The silence that followed was worse than the scream itself. It felt staged, like bait tossed out on a hook. Sarah's face crumpled in terror. We can't just sit here while he's... Mark cut her off. That's not Jason. You know it's not. His hand shook as it hovered over the lantern. That's her. But Sarah wouldn't listen. Then what? We just stay here while he dies out there? What if it's really him? Her words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, none of us dared breathe. I realized then, Eleanor wasn't going to let this end in the cabin. She would drag us back to the water, whether through screams, shadows, or our own guilt. Emily sat on the cabin floor, stiff and pale, like she'd turned to stone. Then she began rocking gently, humming a low, tuneless melody. We tried to snap her out of it, but her eyes stared straight ahead, unfocused. Then she whispered, "He's not gone. She's holding him. She wants us there when she takes him." Sarah whimpered. "Stop, Emily, please." Emily's lips curled into a faint smile. When her gaze finally flicked upward, her eyes weren't hers anymore. They glowed faintly, reflecting the candlelight like frost. "She's waiting," Emily crooned in a sing-song voice. "At the lake. The water's hungry." The words were too precise, too steady. It wasn't Emily talking, it was Eleanor speaking through her. Mark slammed his fist onto the wooden table, making the lantern wobble. "No one's leaving. You heard her, she wants us at the lake because it's a trap." Sarah's hands trembled as she stuffed camera gear into her bag. "We can't just abandon him. If Jason's alive, we owe it to him." Mark's jaw clenched. "And what if he's already gone? What if the second you step into that fog, she pulls you under too? You'll die for nothing." Their voices clashed, sharp and desperate, filling the small cabin with panic. Finally, Sarah turned to me, eyes wet. "Tyler, please. Say something." It was the worst choice I'd ever had to make. Stay in the false safety of the cabin, or walk willingly into Eleanor's grasp. But I couldn't shake Jason's scream. If I stayed, it would haunt me forever. I swallowed hard. "We go." The forest had changed. It no longer felt like the woods we'd hiked during daylight. Every tree leaned unnaturally inward, their branches twisting like skeletal arms, funneling us toward the water. The fog thickened the farther we went, swirling around our ankles, whispering as if alive. At times, I thought I heard laughter in the mist, faint giggles, like children playing just out of sight. Sarah clung to my arm, her breath shaking. Mark walked ahead with the lantern, muttering curses under his breath. Emily trailed behind, humming the same eerie lullaby. The air grew colder. My breath puffed white. My chest tightened as if my heartbeat had synced to the rhythm of waves I couldn't yet see. Then, through the trees, the glimmer of black water appeared. The lake. The shoreline was alive with mist. The lake rippled though the night was still. And at the water's edge, kneeling in the mud, was Jason. His back hunched, shoulders heaving like he was sobbing. His fingers clawed into the earth as if trying to hold himself steady. "Jason!" Sarah cried, breaking from the group. "Wait!" Mark hissed, but she was already halfway to the water. Jason twisted his head toward us. His eyes were rolled completely white, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream. And then he spoke, though it wasn't his voice. "You came back, just like she said." The water erupted. Dozens of pale, childlike hands splashed out from beneath the surface, reaching toward the shore. Emily's laughter rang behind us, shrill and hysterical, blending with the splashes. The ground shuddered under our feet. The lake churned violently, waves crashing against the shore as if something massive stirred beneath. From the center of the water, a figure began to emerge. At first, she was a shimmer of mist and shadow. Then she solidified, rising in her drenched wedding gown, its fabric flowing like smoke across the surface. Her hollow face glistened with water, eyes glowing faintly. The air grew heavy, pressing down on us. Sarah staggered back, Mark dropped the lantern, and Emily fell to her knees, whispering, "She's here, she's here." Eleanor's gaze fixed on me. Her voice carried over the waves, low and commanding. "Tyler, come home." The water surged forward, rushing toward us like a living wall, and the mist closed in behind. We were trapped. The water rose higher, the waves clawing at the shore. Jason convulsed violently as if pulled by invisible strings. Emily's humming grew into a scream. And Eleanor stretched out her arm, not toward Sarah, not toward Mark, not even toward Jason, but directly at me. The last thing I felt was the earth trembling beneath my feet, as if the lake itself was trying to drag me under. The lake didn't ripple. It erupted. A wall of black water exploded upward with a deafening roar, slamming into us like a freight train. The force knocked Sarah flat on her back, water and mud splattering her face as she screamed. Mark grabbed her by the arm and yanked her up just before the waves swallowed the shoreline entirely. I could barely hear over the thunder of rushing water. The cold bit into my skin like knives, cutting straight to the bone. My clothes clung to me, heavy, suffocating. I staggered backward, gasping for air, but the fog pressed closer, wrapping around us like a suffocating blanket. And then Jason screamed. It wasn't human, it was an unholy shriek that ripped through the night, echoing in the fog like some wounded animal. His body jerked violently, his back arching at an impossible angle. His jaw cracked open, wider and wider, until I heard bones snap. He should have collapsed. He should have been dead. But he didn't fall. Someone, was holding him up. Emily crawled forward through the mud, eyes wide, lips curled into a grin so manic it froze my blood. "She's here," she whispered, then giggled. "She's here. She's so beautiful." The lantern sputtered, then went out. And suddenly, there was no more light. Only her. A faint, glowing figure walking across the surface of the lake. Eleanor didn't walk like a person. She glided, her gown trailing behind her like smoke made solid. Her hair floated in the air as if she were still underwater. Her hollow eyes locked on me, and I felt my chest tighten, like invisible fingers pressing against my ribs. The air froze with every step she took. My breath turned into frosty clouds. The mud beneath my boots crackled with ice. Even the trees groaned, their bark splitting as the temperature dropped. "Tyler," she whispered. My name was barely audible, but it wasn't in my ears, it was in my head. It was everywhere. The sound reverberated through my skull until I thought it might split open. Sarah clutched my arm desperately. "Don't look at her. Don't." Too late. My eyes locked on hers, and I couldn't move. Couldn't blink. Couldn't even breathe. And in her eyes, I saw the truth of the lake. It wasn't just water. It was a grave. An endless, rotting grave. Pale faces floated just below the surface, thousands of them, mouths open in eternal screams. Their hands reached upward, clawing, begging, but no one ever came. And now Eleanor was offering me a place among them. Jason stopped screaming. He stood unnaturally still, his head tilted at a sharp, broken angle, blood dribbling from his split lips. His eyes rolled white, and his chest rose and fell in jerky, unnatural spasms. Then, without warning, he lunged. His hands shot forward like claws, reaching for Sarah's throat. His nails, black and cracked, slashed at her skin. She shrieked, stumbling back, but Mark caught Jason mid-strike. The two of them slammed into the mud, thrashing violently. Jason's strength was inhuman, his limbs jerking as though strings controlled him. Mark struggled, veins bulging in his neck as he tried to hold Jason's arms down. "Help me!" Mark cried, desperation breaking through his voice. But Eleanor only smiled, watching the chaos unfold with cold amusement. Jason's head snapped toward me mid-struggle, his face stretching unnaturally wide, his jaw hanging loose like a broken doll. When he spoke, it wasn't his voice. It was hers. "You should never have come back." The lake boiled, sending waves of steam into the fog. Then came the sound, high-pitched, shrill laughter. At first, I thought it was an echo. But then the water broke. Dozens of small, pale hands clawed out of the black surface. One by one, they emerged, children. Dozens of them. Their skin was gray and bloated, their hair plastered flat against their skulls, their eyes nothing but hollow sockets dripping black water. They crawled from the lake on all fours, their movements jerky and insect-like, backs arching unnaturally as their heads lolled at impossible angles. The laughter grew louder, blending into a chorus that rang inside my skull. They encircled us quickly, their little hands dragging through the mud, leaving trails as they closed in. One of them tilted its head toward Eleanor, then toward me, and rasped in a voice so faint I almost didn't hear it. "She wants him. Only him." And then, as one, every single child turned their head toward me. Mark screamed as Jason's strength overwhelmed him. Jason slammed him into the mud, his hands wrapping around Mark's throat, squeezing with inhuman strength. Sarah ran to help, pulling desperately at Jason's shoulders, but Eleanor raised a single hand. With a flick of her fingers, Sarah was thrown backward as if struck by a tidal wave. She skidded across the mud, gasping for air, her arm bent at a sickening angle. Emily, meanwhile, had stopped laughing. Her face was eerily calm as she stood, mud dripping from her dress. Without hesitation, she walked into the lake. The ghost children clung to her legs, pulling her deeper, but she didn't resist. She welcomed it, her lips curled into a serene smile as she whispered, "She chose me." But Eleanor didn't even glance at Emily. Her eyes were only on me. I tried to run. Tried to move. But my legs were heavy, as though the mud itself had risen to hold me down. My lungs burned, begging for air, but I couldn't breathe. Eleanor extended her arm toward me, her voice sharp, commanding, final. "You're already mine, Tyler." The circle of children closed in. Jason's scream mingled with Mark's choking gasps. Sarah writhed in pain on the mud. Emily vanished beneath the waves. And Eleanor took her last step forward. The ground beneath me trembled, cracks spreading across the shore as if the earth itself were about to split. The night was no longer about resisting Eleanor. It was about surviving her wrath.